Hey, doing, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Thank you for joining. This is episode 24 of Hockey on the Spot, continuing with the 30 teams in 30 days for the entire month of August. And for today, we close out our tour of the new Atlantic Division with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And this is a big one right here. The Leafs, very important team here. So here we go. The Leafs had a very good season last year. Last year, ending what was currently the longest playoff drought in the National Hockey League once the Florida Panthers made it in 2011 2012. Last year, excellent season for the Leafs. Big comeback year after so many years. In a lockout shortened year, they finally get into the playoffs, finishing fifth in the Eastern Conference, third in the now extinct Northeast Division. Well, somewhat extinct, I should say. And ninth overall in the league. They had 26 wins, 17 losses, and 5 overtime/shootout losses. So 26, 17, and 5. That's what they went for a combined 57 points. 5, 4, and 1 in their last 10. And those 57 points were part of a three-way tie with the Washington Capitals and the San Jose Sharks. The Leafs would finish first of those three teams over the division-winning, the now extinct Southeast Division-winning Washington Capitals. The Caps would be second, and the Sharks would be last on the between those three. So it was a very good regular season for the Leafs. They get into the playoffs, fall in the series, play against the Boston Bruins, fall in the series 3-1, and make a huge comeback to tie the series. And then in Game 7 in Boston, they look like they're going to win. They have a 4-1 lead going into the third period, and they choke. Boston scores 3 goals to tie the game, and then Patrice Bergeron scores not only the game tire, but the overtime winner to win it for the Bruins by a final score of 5-4 in OT and send the Leafs packing in what was a very disappointing playoff exit. But a lot to look forward to going into this season, though. You know, James Reimer was absolutely excellent last year. Even in the playoffs, despite the loss, he was really good. And a lot of the guys that they had last year were good. Phil Kessel, after a rough start, really turned it on at the end of the year. Nazem Kadri had a breakout year. Tyler Bozak was pretty solid last year. Joffrey Lupul, when healthy, was good. Obviously, still suffering from injury problems. Something that will hopefully be remedied this season. So there was a lot to look forward to and look upon this season. And so it made for a really busy offseason for Dave Nonis and the Toronto Maple Leafs. And it actually started with the general manager, Dave Nonis, receiving a 5-year contract extension to remain as the GM for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He replaced Brian Burke when he was let go and went back to the Anaheim Ducks as a consultant to the GM. They also signed Tyler Bozak to a 5-year extension this offseason, worth a lot of money. Good player. I don't like the contract, though. I don't like the contract. This is a player who they're expecting to be their top-line center this year, when realistically, he's really not a top-line center, which tells you that the Leafs do not have a whole lot of depth down the middle. That could be their weakness this season. But again, they did go out and get quite a few free agents, as well as lose a bunch of free agents. Like, for example, defenseman Ryan O'Byrne. He's still an unrestricted free agent, but he won't be back in Toronto. And they let a couple of guys go as well. Clark MacArthur is gone after several solid seasons with the Leafs. He goes and signs a 2-year deal with the Ottawa Senators. Left winger. right winger Leo Komarov surprisingly decides to leave the Leafs this season and go to the KHL. However, he did vow that he would return to the NHL for 2014-2015, but it may not necessarily be with the Leafs, so he will not be back, at least for now. Um, um, and then the Leafs also used one of the few teams this offseason that used both of their compliance buyouts. One compliance buyout, the first was on defenseman Mike Komisarek, who had been a huge disappointment since day one coming over to the Leafs. He goes and signs a one-year deal with the Carolina Hurricanes. And the other compliance buyout was used on center Mikhail Grabovski, who did not have a good year last year. Saw quite a bit of fourth line duty at times during the season, especially in the playoffs. And after he was bought out, he had a huge fallout with the head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs, former Anaheim Ducks coach Randy Carlyle. A rivalry developed between those two with that. He was cursing him out and everything. Mikhail Grabovski now sits as the number one remaining unrestricted free agent. However, it is a very strong possibility that he may sign today with the Washington Capitals. So we'll definitely be waiting for that to happen. If that does happen, other teams like the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Anaheim Ducks could also use his talent, but he will not be back in Toronto. However, with these losses, the Leafs did make quite a few additions as well. Some really big ones, actually. Of course, I like to start small and work my way up. So some of the smaller signings were signing a pair of defensemen. They got T.J. Brennan from the Florida Panthers, a defenseman, a young defenseman, former Buffalo Sabre, who played really well when he went to the Florida Panthers last year. And he's a kid who with a lot of high expectations on his plate to be a solid two-way defenseman. They also signed defenseman Paul Ranger, who has not been in the league for a very long time. Last saw NHL action, I believe, in the 2009-2010 season as a member of the Tampa Bay Lightning. He only played a few games. He had been hurt ever since, and even when he was healthy, he'd been playing in the American Hockey League. He spent last year with the Toronto Marlies, the American Hockey League affiliate of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and now he officially signs with the Leafs to a one-year deal. So that's an interesting one. A guy who at one point was out to be considered one of the best offensive defensemen on the Tampa Bay Lightning roster, and maybe developing into one of the best offensive defensemen in the game as well. But the injuries really set him back far, and now he's an under-the-radar player, and he could actually thrive in that. This could be a huge comeback year for him, but again, he has not played in the NHL for a long time, so that could be the negative of this. And then the Leafs also made a trade at the draft, acquiring centerman Dave Bolland from the Stanley Cup champion Chicago Blackhawks in exchange for 3 draft picks. So a very interesting trade. Chicago gets a lot of picks. But going the other way, Dave Bolland was starting to fall out of the Chicago system. He was really starting to fade, and he hadn't done anything significant for them except for the biggest goal of the season for the Chicago Blackhawks. Dave Bolland was guilty of scoring the Cup winning goal in Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Finals against the Boston Bruins, but that was the only significant thing he had done for them in a very long time. A guy once projected to be their second-line center, really fell apart because of all the injuries he had to go through. So now he goes to the Leafs and has quite a few expectations on his plate. Assumingly will probably start the year on the third line, but definitely could work his way up to the second line if he plays well, because this is a kid who used to be a star down in juniors. So don't underestimate the skills of David Boland. If he can stay healthy, of course. That will be key. And then the Leafs, for the Toronto Maple Leafs, they made the biggest free agent signing of the year. The number one, when Vincent Lecavalier was signed by the Philadelphia Flyers before the July 5th free agent frenzy, New Jersey Devils forward David Clarkson became the top unrestricted free agent forward on the list, and he went on to sign with the Toronto Maple Leafs. The player going there, excellent move by the Leafs as far as getting a player. He probably will not be the 30-goal scorer he was in 2011, 2012. I think that was just a one lucky year for him, but he definitely has the potential to be maybe a 17, maybe 20 goal scorer at most, and maybe 40, 45 points. Definitely a top 6 forward, a pest on the ice, a guy who teams hate to play against. Pretty much a similar type player to Sean Avery, but with a lot more skill and a much better knack for the net. Much better overall player. Again, though, he loves to hit, he loves to fight, and he loves to get in the face of other teams. And he's a Randy Carlyle type player. He goes to the front of the net. So the player going there is good. However, I do not like the contract. The contract, among the worst in the National Hockey League. They signed him to a 7-year deal worth a lot of money. And it's the same thing with the Tyler Bozak re-signing. They're signing a player to a long-term deal that isn't like a top-line player. Even though Bozak is going to be the top-line center, realistically, he's not a top-line center. And David Clarkson's not a top-line winger. He's not a top-line right winger, specifically. He's a second-line player, and you don't sign those second-line players to that long of a deal. Yes, he's a good player, and he is a top 6 forward, but the contract is terrible. It really is. But in the long run, the Toronto Maple Leafs could see the longevity of signing a player like that to that long of a contract. And honestly, why he was the top unrestricted free agent when there were definitely much better players on that list is kind of beyond me. So, good. I like the player going there. I don't like the contract. And I think anyone could vouch for me on that. To me, the biggest move for the Toronto Maple Leafs this offseason came in the form of a trade. The biggest move was not the Clarkson signing. It actually was a trade that came after Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Finals with the Los Angeles Kings. They acquired goaltender Jonathan Bernier from the Los Angeles Kings in exchange for goaltender Ben Scrivens, right winger Matt Fratton, and a draft pick. So with Matt Fratton, they lose a highly sought-after top 6 forward, and with Ben Scrivens, they lose a good future goaltender and a solid backup goaltender. But again, they get Jonathan Bernier in that trade, and Bernier, he's a big deal. This is a guy who many anticipated to be a starter for a long time, but we knew it wasn't going to happen in Los Angeles. He wasn't going to surpass Jonathan Quick. So the only option was for him to be traded. After the Leafs had backed out of the Roberto Luongo sweepstakes because of his long contract, they instead go for Jonathan Bernier. And now, again, a former first-round draft pick, he definitely has the potential. Yes, he has a Stanley Cup on his resume, but he wasn't a starter for that. So for him, personally, he probably would not count that. He thinks he can win a Stanley Cup on his own as a starter. And that's going to be interesting to see because James Reimer did have a very good year last year. That's going to be the big question of the year pretty much. Who's going to be the starter for the Toronto Maple Leafs? James Reimer or Jonathan Bernier? Both have the potential to do that. And though Bernier would not be able to surpass Jonathan Quick as the starter, he definitely has the potential to surpass James Reimer. And after they got him, they did sign him to a 3-year extension. So that is probably the biggest question. Who starts in Toronto? Another big question. Can David Clarkson be the player they hope he's going to be? Can Dave Bolin get back into form? A lot of questions to be answered again. And again, it goes back to the goaltending. Bernier, a very skilled goaltender, or butterfly type goaltender, likes to play low. And he doesn't let in a lot. He was one of the better backup goalies in the league in LA. Definitely was. Another big question for the Leafs is a guy like Morgan Rielly ready to step into the lineup this year. Looking at their lineup, though, it definitely could be a little tough. There is definitely a sixth spot available, and Morgan Rielly will definitely battle for that spot, along with guys like Corbinian Holzer, Paul Ranger, and Mark Frazier. Their top five is all pretty much already, pretty much for the most part, already set. Dion Phaneuf, Carl Gunnarsson, Jake Gardiner, John Michael Liles, assuming that John Michael Liles does not get traded like they were trying to do earlier in the year. Cody Franson is also listed there. However, he is still a restricted free agent. They got to try to get him signed. And as far as forwards go, they have Nazem Kadri as their second-line center, although a guy who I would not be surprised seeing move up to the top-line spot past Tyler Bozak. Only one problem, he too is a restricted free agent. So now Dave Nonis has a lot on his hands. He has to try to get both Nazem Kadri and Cody Franson signed, and with just about under $5 million to do so. He's got to really work his magic with this one. He absolutely does. If he can get those two signed, they're going to be in good shape with their top four on defense, and he's going to be in good shape with his top six at forward. He definitely will. You got a kid like Joe Colburn who's definitely going to play this year, probably as the third line winger. They got a solid depth chart here. They absolutely do. There's also a possibility for kids like Jeremy DiMaggio, or Tyler Biggs to definitely step in. That definitely have the potential on this roster. But again, the big question really is the goaltending. Who is the starter? That's going to be the big question. And the other one really too, can Joffrey Lupul stay healthy? And that's going to be key for their season this year. Okay, guys. Now let us take a look at the Toronto Maple Leafs top 10 prospects. For all the other teams, all of the other 7 teams in this division, Boston Bruins, Buffalo Sabres, Detroit Red Wings, Florida Panthers, Montreal Canadiens, Ottawa Senators, and Tampa Bay Lightning, they all have solid and deep top 10 prospects. The Toronto Maple Leafs, unfortunately, are the only team in the division that do not. Their top 10 is not very good. I'm not at all impressed with this. Morgan Rielly's their number 1. Joe Colburn's their number 2. They have Frederick Gauthier on there at number 4, Tyler Biggs at number 6, Carter Ashton at number 7, and Stuart Percy at number 8. And they do have some guys on there, but no one as significant as the other teams. The guy on this list that really catches my attention the most, usually I try to stay away from the top prospects. This one I cannot. Defenseman Morgan Rielly is without question the most impressive prospect on this list for me. The number 5 pick in the 2012 NHL entry draft. Huge offensive defenseman, or at least he's expected to be. And so he'll definitely battle for the 6th spot on defense this year, or even the 5th spot. A former Moose Jaw Warrior of the Western Hockey League, had 54 points in 60 games there. So a lot will be expected out of him to have a good camp. Now, the player on this Toronto team that needs to play well in order for the Leafs to be good this year, no question, has to be Joffrey Lupul. And it's not a matter of playing well, because when he's healthy, he is one of their best players. It's the matter of staying healthy. If the Leafs are going to be a playoff team, he has to stay healthy this year. Overall, are the Leafs a playoff team? I think they are a bubble team, and there are going to be a lot of questions involving their goaltending. However, I like their depth, so I am going to say yes. Okay, guys, that'll do it for episode 24 of Hockey on the Spot. Join me again tomorrow when we talk about the Carolina Hurricanes. So until then, this has been Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Tune in again tomorrow. Have a great day.